I'm ready to show you my next quilt block, which is a crazy quilt. So I have everything set up at my sewing machine. I also have my iron ready because this block is going to take a lot of piecing and a lot of pressing. So I have my different fabrics from all of my different families, and I'm going to combine them to create a block for myself. And it is going to end up 9.5 by 5 inches. And I made a paper template just so I can visually keep an eye and tell when I've pieced enough. So the thing that's amazing about this technique is that it's very free form and kind of organic. You can use whatever pieces you have, and you really have a chance to be creative and do interesting things. So I just picked a piece from my pile. And then the thing that you want to think about is making angles. So I have a different piece, and I'm just going to line it up across, and there's no like set pattern to this. So you just play with the fabric, do what you think looks interesting, and the more that you mix it up, the more interesting it will end up. The other nice thing about this is you don't have to be super precise with your seam allowance. So I'm just going to use the edge of my presser foot so that I have, enough space for it to not come undone, and my small stitch length. You don't have to reverse, but I like to. Okay, and then you can bring this over to your table and cut the other piece, and hold on to that. If it's a decent size, hold on to it because you can use it. And just for ease of filming, I'm not going to show you this part, but I'm going to go to the ironing board, or you could set up a mat on your table if you have room, and I'm just going to press this one way. I've pressed it flat to one side, and I like to take an extra step and press it from the top too, just to make sure it's nice and smooth. And you can see I'm already starting to get some interesting angles. And so I'm going to move on to another piece of fabric. This one looks interesting. And I'm just going to kind of play around and see what I want to do. There's no wrong answers here. And if you have the piece is a lot bigger than what you need, you can cut it. And then go back to the sewing machine again. Trim and then press. And like I said before, if you have interesting pieces that are big enough to use, hold on to them. This one's pretty small, so I'm going to get rid of it. Eventually I do want to end up with a rectangle-ish shape, so that is something you can think about as you're piecing. Okay, so the bad news is I was having a little filming drama, and none of that recorded. So you're seeing the finished product at the end. So I want you to know that I had kind of a big blobby piece that I made sure was bigger than my template. And you can play around with how you lay out your template to maximize your block. And then I used my rotary cutter and ruler, or you can use, the lines. Either way, you're just going to cut out your block or scissors. And then you end up with something really interesting like this. So I'm going to create some name blocks to go on the blocks. And I'm using my sewing machine's embroidery feature. I just have really basic block letters. And for these ones, I'm doing name, birth date, and place. And so I've already programmed my sewing machine. And mine has an auto stop feature, so I made sure that I did that so it won't keep going a second time. It's probably hard to see, actually I need this one, but I drew a straight line with plenty of space because I'm going to trim this down to the size that I want it afterwards, and I'm going to use this line as my guide. So I'm going to line up the opening in my presser foot over the dot and line up the center over the line, and I'm just going to let the sewing machine do its job. And I like to put the needle down in case I need to stop for any reason. Okay, that's the auto stop. So I have my name And then I've played with the spacing on my machine, so I know that for my next line, if I line up the right edge of the presser foot with the bottom of my stitching, then that will give a good distance in between the lines. So I'm just going to continue and do my other information, and then this will be ready to sew on to my crazy quilt block. A quick tip with my embroidery: because my date is not very long and his birthplace is really long, I went ahead and drew a line extending where the stitching would be so that I have a guide to line up when I sew the last row. I have my name all done, and so now I need to get this ready to put on the block. And I want to do a little product tip here. So I did use the Frixion heat erase marker for my lines for my embroidery, but now I need to make lines to press this, so the Frixion won't work for that. I'm going to use my Crayola washable instead. I didn't use this for the embroidery because I didn't want to wait until I washed it for it to come out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a border, and I'm using the numbers on my ruler. You know, you can do whatever works for you. And I'm just going to draw lines all the way around to create a rectangle around my embroidery. And then I'll take it over, I'll trim it, and then I'll take it over to the iron and press the edges under so that I can then pin it and top stitch it down, as you will see very soon. So I'm just going to use scissors because they're handy, and cut about 1/4 inch, give or take. Now that I have my crazy quilt blocks, these are for myself and my parents, and because there's so much going on with the fabric, I definitely didn't want to try to embroider directly on the block. So I've taken some plain fabric that goes with, you know, the color scheme, and embroidered my information, and then I'm going to place that on my block. And it's a good idea to double check that you are in the middle-ish. I'm going to pin that, and I did something similar with my photo blocks, and I did an applique like zigzag stitch. For this one, there's enough going on, I don't need that border, so I'm just going to use my same white thread and just stitch close to the edge. So sometimes with design, we have to pull ourselves back because we get super excited. So I'm going to line up really close to the edge and just do a straight stitch. When you get to the corner, you want your needle down so that you can pivot neatly. Okay, there's my finished block. So, you know, you do lose a little bit of the piecing under that, but I think that the simple works really well, and the crazy quilt makes a nice frame. So that is my block.